Welcome back to Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth. My name is Tom, and I'll be your guide as we spend this episode exploring Chapter 17 of Wizard's First Rule. In our last episode, Richard and Kaylin sit completely dependent on a blind woman while she tells them the story about that one time in the Boundary where she cut off her own foot. Please note that these episodes contain spoilers, heavy spoilers, not just for this book, but for future books in the series. If you haven't read the series yet and you intend to, I'd encourage you to read the books first and then come back to see what I think about them. Spoiler alert. The things that make me feel connected to these characters are things I want to feel connected to inside myself. At the beginning of this chapter, best estimates place the time since the beginning of Wizard's First Rule on the morning of the 9th day. There are an estimated number of 197 apples left in Richard's backpack, and the estimated number of people killed by Richard's hand is 1. We begin the chapter as Richard and Kaylin leave Adie's house to follow through the path into the Boundary. The rain has let up for now, and the path they walk is covered in a soft carpet of brown pine needles. The way is still surrounded by comforting parts of nature. The dead trees which have fallen seem to have found peace, as many ferns make the path into the other world seem a lot less threatening. There's even some fussy squirrels that don't much like having two new people walking through their front yard. Lousy adventurers always coming through and wrecking up the place. I've got my eye on you, just don't try anything funny. And with that being said, Richard immediately pulls a branch off of a nearby balsam fir only to strip all of the needles attached to it for absolutely no reason at all. Squirrley? Yes, dear? We got some trouble outside. Make sure the winter nuts are locked up tight. I don't want to scare the kids, but just to be safe, I'm going to go get my nut gun out of my nut safe. It's loaded with nuts. I always pray that I never have to use it, but I won't be the one laying there wishing I had if it comes to it. Fortunately, they're able to pass without incident, having successfully skirted a danger they were not even aware of. The squirrels let them go, thankful for only suffering some minor property damage. Richard and Kaylin start having a conversation about Adie, the bone woman, and the difference between wizards and sorceresses. According to our frequent friends at treesymbolism.com, the balsam fir symbolizes power, determination, and perseverance. The Celtish people also associated it with the importance of remembering the past, learning from one's mistakes, and cherishing the wonderful times. And the ferns symbolize honesty and trust, which we covered in the episode where we were introduced to Adie. The ferns are honest, clarity, certainty, and the combination of the symbolism of these three things, when it is tied together with Richard's action of breaking off a branch and snipping the needles from it, is beautiful. That is because pine needles have two different types of common symbolism associated with them. In the realm of those who practice what they believe is real magic, I've never seen or studied it before, so who am I to say? They view the pine needle as a powerful spell component capable of offering protection from evil. So in its simplest form, Richard's action of stripping the pine needles from the branch is very similar to the use of pine needles as a spell component to give protection. An idea which makes good sense to do before a journey as dangerous as this one. According to the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois Confederacy, the pine tree is sacred and considered a symbol of peace. Finally, in the study of symbolism within the world of dreams, the pine needles have a range of meanings depending on if they are green or if they are brown. The author says green pine needles might represent the start of something exciting. They build up to something you've been looking for some time. They also symbolize peace and prosperity. To dream of dried up pine needles, like the ones they're walking on, represents unpleasant feelings about a problem in life which is unbearable and a waste of time to deal with. Unpleasant feelings about having to be meticulous about a problem that doesn't matter to you anymore. And most importantly, feeling that it's easier to just let an issue go on than confront it or speak up about it. Now, all of that might seem like a random bunch of crap, and it is. From a lot of perspectives, that's exactly what it would look like. But let me take those random bits of information and put them together as I see them, so maybe you can see the shy and beautiful thing that I do. Both of them are walking on a carpet of brown, dried pine needles through patches of ferns which are alive and well. Here is the journey Richard and Kaylin are taking, and symbolically, this is the author trying to tell us exactly what kind of thought process we need to have if we are going to take such a journey ourselves. And if we're going to solve the problems in our lives which give us the most pain, this is the way to do it. The ferns symbolize complete and compassionate honesty. And the brown pine needles represent what happens to a person who tries to get through the difficult path of answering the questions that are hurting them. Honesty is alive and well and is the way to the path. The brown pine needles represent unpleasant feelings about having to be meticulous about a problem that doesn't matter to you anymore. Feeling it's easier to let the issue go rather than confront it. The brown pine needles represent what happens when honesty with the self about what feelings are being used to control which decisions and makes one ask if the current way of doing things really is the best way to do it or if there's another way. Honesty might point some fingers at choices a person has made which could make their lives better if they tried them. But a lack of honesty with the self only screams that the only choices are the same ones we have always had and it's never any different. Those who serve a stronger master than honesty cannot make it past the ferns and have become a carpet of brown pine needles littering the floor for those who don't have the honesty with themselves to cross over. And that by itself is a beautiful, chilling, and powerful scene on its own, isn't it? It could almost be like marching over a road made of human skulls instead, except the skulls are representing people who died. Every pine needle would represent a mind which has become dead inside when it comes to this particular problem or issue. But that's not why I'm making such a big deal about the symbolism here, because that level of symbolism is one I've come to expect from Terry Goodkind when he's using trees and plants to make his point. He does this quite often. The part where Richard breaks off a piece of the balsam fir and strips off its needles is the part that made my jaw drop to the floor. Remember from before, the balsam fir tree symbolizes power, determination, and perseverance, which are direct stand-ins for Kaylin as a symbol for perseverance, Richard as a symbol for power, and 80/honesty as a symbol for determination. The Celtic people also associated it with the importance of remembering the past, learning from one's mistakes, and cherishing the wonderful times. So Richard breaks himself off a literal piece of the three qualities needed to make it through the most painful parts of the mind, while also taking hold of his past memories and cherished wonderful times. So currently, Richard is holding a piece of balsam fir which contains six, count them six, different kinds of symbolism all at once. You have honesty, integrity, justice, remembering the past, appreciating the good times, and learning from the mistakes. And if you were fortunate enough to be born during the proper time period, some of those good times may be memories of the television show Good Times. Now, put that next to the symbolism for green pine needles as the start of something new, peace and prosperity. When Richard strips those green needles off the balsam fir, it is exactly like when he draws the sword of truth, cuts the inside of his arm, and asks the blade to be true that day. This is not a peaceful symbol at all, especially coming from someone who loves nature as much as Richard. This symbol is a declaration of war. The balsam fir is what represents the three core needs of the mind that can resolve its most painful problems: justice, integrity, and honesty. The green pine needles are all wolves in sheep's clothing when it comes to getting through the most painfully difficult ideas. They seem like friends, but they turn into enemies of integrity, justice, and honesty. We've talked about what those three things mean a lot, so let's talk about the other positive-sounding symbolism, which is really the trap. Green pine needles represent remembering the past. That sounds good on the outside, but when a person is trying to solve a painful problem, remembering the past does nothing to improve the future, does it? Nor does remembering the past say anything about learning from it or remembering it correctly. The past is a poisonous bog that can trap a person into reliving the same moments of life over and over again, being powerless to change the past or anything about these moments so much that they forget about doing things in the present to affect the future. The first symbolism of stripping those green pine needles away is to remember the wizard's seventh rule. Life is the future, not the past, which is exactly the kind of thing Richard uses when he runs the sword of truth through his father later on in the following chapter in the Boundary. He literally strips away his memories from the past and uses the truth to put them where they belong in the present. The second is appreciating the good times, a small percentage of those being memories of the television show Good Times. That also sounds good, and when done properly, it is. But this too can be a deadly trap and a limitation when a person feels they need strength to walk through difficult and painful things. This becomes a serious loss of power when the appreciation for good times, some of those from the television show Good Times, creates a dependence on all of the things in our lives at all times being seen as good, so much that life is altered to avoid anything which is even slightly uncomfortable, because such a dependence would leave a person unprepared to be in a place in the present which is not equal to the good times of the past, like the greatest hits from the television show Good Times for some of you. Those are the people who can't have difficult conversations about death or sickness or religion or politics and shut down immediately once any conversation reaches a point where they must question what they previously believed to be true. Once again, Richard strips that branch away from the tree, finally learning from past mistakes. That sounds awesome, doesn't it? Well, guess what? It's a monkey's paw. It doesn't matter if you learn from your past mistakes if you learn the wrong lessons and make the wrong conclusions or see something and think that it's something else when really none of those things are true. You've got it wrong. When someone is trying to work through the issues feeding their depression, they might remember a time when they had a bad experience while trying to help themselves previously. And that pain makes them choose to avoid the situation which made them feel that way at all and convince them that thinking getting help isn't worth the risk because it will just make them feel hurt. Or a person can learn all the ways a certain blank, 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 or blank is always the type of person who doesn't deserve their empathy and compassion. One of the easiest ways to test is to ask oneself, can you come up with groups of people where blank, 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 and blank is always good or must be this or must be that? If you have people on that list of blanks, then that is where your painful ideas live. Once the decision is made that X person isn't a person anymore, there is no path through the narrows until that assumption is removed and replaced with something that is a lot more honest. And Richard strips that away. And here's the part that should give you chills. The pine needles also represent peace and tranquility. And Richard strips them away as well, leaving only the stem of the balsam fir, with the only symbols remaining representing honesty, justice, and integrity. Symbolically, Richard throws down the gauntlet and says with these symbols what we need to say when we work through our own painful ideas. We need to strip away everything we think and we know and make those green pine needles turn into brown ones instead. Meaning the first step is to strip away the past and all of our assumptions and stop fighting so hard to shout about what we know. Instead, try to figure out the things we don't know. Nobody has perfect knowledge of a thing. There's always more to learn. So a person doesn't need to worry so hard about what they know. They need to work very hard to care about finding out what other things they don't know are true. And that desire and limitation, once it is stripped away, it is green at first, very important, and a place of peace for the person holding on to it. Once separated from the branch, our passion for fighting the battles which give our painful ideas their power transforms into an exercise we no longer care about. Needlessly complicated and not worth the effort or the cost. All of that contained within the description of Richard pulling that branch and stripping the needles from it. Mind fucking blown. And I'm going to do it again. So buckle up because you're about to see some serious shit. It's a medical fact that your subconscious mind tries to talk to you and give you hints about things which can help you in life. And a lot of these clues go unnoticed or get chalked up to a warm feeling or a fascination in something which doesn't seem to make a lot of logical sense. It just makes you feel good. The things which a person finds comfort in, however minor, is the subconscious mind's way of saying these things will help you if you can ever figure them out. So let me ask you to ask yourself, have you ever broken a branch off a tree and stripped the leaves from it? And if you did, how did that make you feel? If there was a certain satisfaction you got from doing that, which really doesn't make sense except in that moment, then you've got a hint in your hand that there is something more to this than just a good vibe. Your mind is telling you you are holding on to things which are holding you back, and you need to strip them away. That message can have 1,000 meanings to 1,000 people, but the message is always the same. I don't know anyone else who's looked into this chain of thought about stripping leaves from sticks, but I know for sure, at least from where I'm looking at, my subconscious mind has been telling me to give this hint for decades, and I'm finally in a place where I can listen to it. And so is everyone else if they want to be. That's the nice part about this sort of thing. It's not something anyone needs to do anything special for. There's no strength required or anything like that. All that needs to happen is for the person to let go of what they know as their focus and use their new freedom to learn things they don't know about the problem that they are facing. Answers to problems we can't solve don't live inside things we already know, or we would have the answer. They live inside things we haven't learned yet. Think of the solution, not the problem. This scene is absolute, unrivaled, symbolic, literary genius. Richard tells Kaylin that Adie is like a transformer, definitely more than meets the eye. Kaylin says, yep, she's a sorceress, and Richard, never having learned a single thing about magic in his entire life, says, what's a sorceress? I've never learned a thing about magic in my life. And Kaylin answers him by comparing a thing of magic he knows nothing about to another thing of magic he knows nothing about, and says Adie is less than a wizard, but more than them. Richard takes a moment to smell the sweet smell of the needles he just pulled off that fir tree and then casts them into the winds. Richard thinks to himself that a sorceress and a wizard might be more than him, but he remembers how fearful Zed and Adie looked once Katie had her hand on them and was making the threat she could use her power on them. And he wonders what that has to do with the thunder without sound he experienced twice before with the quad and with the night wisp. He also remembers the pain from being close to it. The symbolism here isn't too tricky. Adie is a sorceress, and in this series she represents honesty, as do many other sorceresses in the series. A wizard represents a person who has taken the time to learn all of the choices they really have once they can become the master of their own feelings, and why they cause people to choose to act a certain way, using honesty as one of the 3 tools required to learn this. Richard currently represents the everyman. He's just a person who isn't sure about any of that stuff and wants to try his best. Someone who is always honest with themselves can do more than someone who is not. And someone who cannot do more than they are capable of now without honesty behind that growth. You can't grow if you aren't honest with yourself. Zed and Adie are scared of Kaylin, the symbol for justice, because she has the power to destroy their minds. We've seen a few examples of how justice can lead a person straight to hell on a road paved with good intentions and noble aspirations. And hidden within all of this is a sweet, symbolic, momentary goodbye for all of the things Richard stripped off the balsam fir branch he was carrying. He takes a moment to inhale the sweet comfort those things brought him and enjoy one final moment of their false but comforting peace before casting them into the wind and leaving them behind. Richard and Kaylin continue down the trail, and Richard is much better at knowing where to go than Kaylin is. She can see the trail sometimes, but his experience makes him the one to have to point out the paths, which are harder for her to see. Richard thinks about what he's going to do once he gets to the Midland, and immediately his mind goes to his friend Zed, wishing he were there to share his plan with him because he felt foolish to be charging into the Midlands without his friend. He feels like once he makes it, he'll be wandering around aimlessly and won't have any direction because he's never been there before. While he is processing his thoughts, he makes it to a spot on the trail where there is a steep wall of rock they're going to have to climb. It feels like it would be easier to try and go around, but Richard remembers Adie's warning about sticking to the path and decides the direct approach is the only way. He thinks to himself there must be a reason the trail goes this way and that. Once he makes it to the top of the rock, he reaches down and pulls Kaylin up. Symbolically, Richard is the one to tell Kaylin where to go, even though Kaylin is out in front. Integrity is better at justice when it comes to knowing what is and isn't a self-destructive thing to do. He guides her the same way integrity guides justice. Richard thinks about Zed and feels foolish for going into the Midlands without knowing what's over there, which makes perfect sense. For a person to pass through their own narrows onto the other side of whatever idea is causing them the most pain, pride must be laid down because it will get in the way. Once pride is left behind, the journey becomes possible, but also more difficult to choose to attempt. Without pride, doing a thing which is new and different feels impossible and like a foolish decision. The lack of direction Richard is describing is what happens once a person finally breaks through. They don't know anything they want to know because they didn't know it before. They just unlock a part of their mind that they didn't have access to, and now they're able to explore it. Once the known world becomes bigger, pride and self-reliance once again return and become useful tools for interacting with the things we know to be true. It is only through the narrows where those things must be left behind for a chance to make it through. Finally, they reach a literal symbolic representation of a mental block in the road, an impasse which looks like more trouble than it's worth to climb. Richard confirms this, but his symbolic honesty told him to stay on the path, so he climbs up and helps pull Kaylin up as well. He says the trail must go this way for a reason, and that is him listening to the honesty he's been using to get this far. He climbs the impasse with its guidance, and once above it, he can reach back for Kaylin and pull her up with him. Integrity must keep a tight rein on a person's sense of justice. Richard helping Kaylin up that rock is the symbolism behind that. Richard goes back to thinking and realizes it's likely that someone is hiding the last box from Dark and Rawl and he can't find it. He decides his best option is to think about how to find someone with magic who might know where the missing box is, and that some of that magic might be good for finding the boxes of Orden. He hopes that whoever has the box is not a friend of Dark and Rawl, and they will be able to convince them to help keep it from him. Richard likes the knowledge that even if Dark and Rawl finds the third box, he doesn't have the guidebook to tell him which box will kill him. Since Richard knows the book by heart, he starts reciting it and looking for a way to use it to stop Dark and Rawl. But that's impossible because the book is written like it's designed to help people understand the process and not identify ways to easily stop them from trying to succeed. Richard notices that most of the book is identifying problems which might occur and how to get around those problems. And only the very last part of it has anything to do with what it will mean for the person opening the box. The symbolism is that Dark and Rawl has the knowledge a wizard does, all of it. But he's missing one vital piece that he needs to get through the narrows. He is missing that essential connection with humanity and respect for the consent of others to act as though they have rightful ownership of their own choices. Symbolically, the one hiding the last box from him is himself. And a small lack of honesty with the self about what is and isn't okay to do to other humans, for whatever reasons he can come up with at that moment. The guidebook, the Book of Counted Shadows, is like what I believe the sword of truth is within our own daily struggles of how to be better people. Who can see more choices than the ones we think we have? That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Choices. The book requires the gift to see and read, and that means a careful study of the wizard's rules and what they really mean. The beginning part tells us that we will know if these words are true or not if they are measured against the truth produced by our own sense of justice. Most of the content is examples of how there are things which might not make sense in the moment, but could actually come in very handy down the road if we find ourselves in a very specific and similar situation. It's full of examples to help us get around specific problems in specific ways. The bit at the end is when we put it all together and take the lessons we want to learn from it. But the final lesson in the Book of Counted Shadows has to be cast away and replaced with the true key to the answers for the problem which cause us pain. We need to put the book down and embrace the only solution which has a chance at working. The single most important message in the entire Sword of Truth series, the lessons we are supposed to learn from the written wizard's rule, is strength without hate. The book can get a person far and help them stay out of trouble, but in the end, it is worthless if compassion and empathy aren't used to turn the blade white and pierce the correct box. The woods start to become slowly more dreary as they travel. Richard and Kaylin are covered in dirt and sweat, and both of them take the opportunity to splash a little cold water on their face. Richard spots a shadow thing on the road, and Kaylin tells her it is better not to touch it or your skin might split open. And they shouldn't let it touch him because of that. At first, both of them have a hard time seeing it, but they're definitely able to spot it off in the distance. They move quickly to go around the shadow. Later on in the day, they eat some lunch and travel at a medium pace. Richard remembers 80's warning to be on the lookout against things which appear to be dead loved ones, but are actually monsters that want to entice them into the boundary and kill them. Richard realizes they must be getting close to the Narrows. He's tired and wants to take a rest, but Addie told them they better not stop or something bad would happen, even though it's about to be the dead of night, and it would have been impossible to leave on their journey, so they would reach the Narrows at sunrise instead of sunset, but I digress. The author is now starting to transition his symbolism from what a person needs to start the journey like this into what a person on this journey can expect to encounter along the way. Thinking about things which cause us pain isn't a pleasant experience and isn't something that can usually be finished very quickly or easily. Unless we take the quick and easy way out by stepping through the boundary into a place where we use our free will to say there are no choices available to us except to listen to how thinking about those things makes us feel. The choice to go deeper and ask why those feelings are there in the first place, and the ability to look at those reasons honestly are all only possible when a person is still on the path to come to peace with the deep hurt and strong feelings of anger trapped inside whatever they're thinking about. The deeper a person goes into this journey, the more they will begin to feel like they're encountering all sorts of shadows of their own, scattered on the trail, trying to make them afraid and panicked, trying to make them turn back. The shadow things kill a person in the Sword of Truth series just by touching them. When their symbolism is explored, that is what the shadow things do inside our minds. They drift silently, almost invisibly. They're hard to see, and if someone wasn't paying attention, it would be really easy to get caught off guard by one of them. The way I try to understand that concept is I think about myself anytime I realized I was being fooled by something I trusted. That list is different for every person, but the lesson is the same. If a person thinks about something that is true, they will act on that knowledge. If what they believe turns out to be false, then that person will be actively defending something which is actually a lie, using the full weight of their conviction to do it. The things which give that lie power to hurt us are the same things Richard strips away from the balsam fir twig when he removes the needles from it. That is what the subconscious mind is saying when it gives us that little dose of satisfaction by stripping away those leaves. And every time I've seen personal growth in myself or another human being, it has always had the same thing in common, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. The person was able to look back at their own choices and see that they had more choices than they thought they did. That is reaching the Narrows. When a person decides to set aside their attachments to these things and puts personal growth and healing ahead of their previously held convictions, they decide, I have been angry and hurting for long enough, and I don't want to be angry and hurting anymore. That is when they decide to pass through the Narrows. That's why the journey takes a day and a half. If the path is short and the thoughts are easy, there is no growth. If it feels scary or brings anger just by having the thoughts at all, there's a good chance that whatever is on the other side of those thoughts is information which will give you a better understanding of how many choices you have. But all of it means passing through the Narrows first. Before the Narrows, symbolically, in the mind, there is only Westland. All of the possible choices are within that area. By passing through the Narrows, you pass through a single point where the way is the way, using honesty, integrity, and a sense of justice to keep all three of them where they belong, eventually leads through this one difficult point and opens up the world in ways which were previously thought to be unimaginable and impossible. The shadows get in the way of this and tell a person to run or be destroyed. The shadows only exist for one purpose: to prevent a person from moving forward. They are the enemy in this situation. The enemy within that says it's best not to think about such things because we already know the answer. The only question I have in response to that is, if somebody already has the answer, what makes them afraid of asking questions about why they might not? If their answer is true, it has nothing to fear from a single thought experiment. That is what it means for Kaylin and Richard to see the shadows starting to materialize on the trail, and what it means for them to go around them and keep going. Richard notices Kaylin is extra jumpy. She grabs his arm when they see a shadow nearby and can only stare at it with frightened, wide eyes. Richard feels panic inside himself and wants to run. He realizes even if they can't see him, if they make him scared enough to convince him running is a good idea, he could end up running straight into the boundary, and it would be the same thing as if they were dead from running into them. The woods are dead quiet except for a raspy scraping noise Richard can hear off the trail. Kaylin gets an epic jump scare when a branch brushes into her face, and she uses it as the perfect excuse to grab Richard's arm and get him to tell her everything is all right. And it works. They can see how hard it is to see the trail at night. Telling the shadows from the trees and from the shadow things on the trail is very difficult for them. Kaylin can see the shadow things, can't see them. But can she see why kids love the taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Kaylin is so scared, Richard literally has to pry her fingers off his arm because she's really digging in. She wonders what they will do if the shadow things come for them, and Richard tells her the sword of truth stopped the things in the boundary. It will stop them here too. The symbolism behind this is a warning about how our sense of justice can become very vulnerable to thinking about things which hold the greatest amount of pain for us. Every idea which floats along, which even hints that one of these things might not be the way we've always thought they were moments of panic, screaming to be latched onto and embraced. Richard and Kaylin knows what happens when you embrace them. Richard knows the sword of truth will stop the shadow things because it worked on them through the boundary the last time something tried to drag Kaylin through it. Richard is correct, and later on he will have to put that knowledge to good use. The reason the sword of truth works on the shadow things is because the shadow things represent the lies we believe which stop us from getting through our own personal narrows. Richard, as integrity, keeps a tight hold on Kaylin, the symbol for justice, to keep her from panicking and bolting off. One answer to getting past the shadow things, the lies we believe, is to ignore those lies and simply walk past them by stripping them away when we explore new ideas, much like Richard strips the needles away. When those shadows can't be stepped around, the only way to destroy them is by using the truth, and that is where honesty is required. Honesty and truth destroy the shadows, which make exploring these ideas about painful things a much calmer experience than it is otherwise. Richard feels like pulling the sword of truth, but he worries that he might have to give their position away if he does that. And there are no guarantees that it even will work, but there don't seem to be too many of them for the sword to make a difference anyway, so it's better to just keep the sword put away and save it for when he knows he's going to need it later. The woods get dark, and it begins to feel like thousands of eyes are watching him from every direction. Richard can hear the soft scraping sounds again, and he can feel the shadow things on both sides of the trail, as well as creeping up behind them. The only clear path is in front of them. Kaylin says she's having a hard time seeing the path and asks Richard if they should take out the nightstone. Richard feels like it might be a bad idea to whip it out because it might overpower the bones, keeping them hidden from the shadow things. The symbolism here is easier to see between two people than it is to see within the self. But imagine two people who are fighting. Both people believe themselves to be right, and neither of them is comfortable enough in their own position to allow information which does not agree with it to stand unresponded to. The dynamic turns into an energetic and complicated presentation of the classic play. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. The only play known to man to have been translated into every possible language imaginable. This goes on until two sides grow so far apart that it isn't even worth engaging anymore. Both sides go their separate ways and nothing happens. No one grows, no one learns anything new, and the only thing which happens is they are further apart than they ever were before. The only difference is when that happens inside a person's own mind, the part of the mind which has the answers that will let a person finally let go of their pain and hurt inside is sent away forever and written off as a counterproductive waste of time. The author gives two examples to say the same thing in this example when he talks about taking out the sword and taking out the nightstone to get through the shadows. Both of these are representations of self-doubt. Think about that for a moment from this perspective. The shadow things are dangerous to interact with. They are the dark whispers which lead a person to become fearful and run, either straight into them or straight into the boundary. You only need the truth to break through when there is something in the way which cannot be handled another way. It's the same with the nightstone. When the focus is not on the path, the only things left to focus on are the things which take a person off their path. The only way to get through to the other side of any idea is by starting with the assumption that everything you think you know about it is wrong. A lot of people crumble here because they don't actually use their logic and reason to know about things. They learn a little bit, even by accident. But when feelings are used to guide what is and isn't true instead of a more hypothetical approach, even considering an alternate point of view can feel like a betrayal to the self. It triggers some intense feelings of fight or flight. And when a person has a habit of using their instinct to feel what is right, they will be vulnerable to choosing to follow the instincts of anger or indignation when things they believed are looked at from a perspective of what would be true if they believed the opposite. That means using the truth and using the nightstone out of fear is using the truth and honesty with fear behind them. And fear will make them ineffective weapons. That is the truth. The true meaning behind Addie's warning when she says fear can be good and keep a person safe in the right circumstances. What she says is true, but until you take the same advice and ask what happens if it's not true, a person using only half of all the information is available to them then. And it is the information hidden inside that other half which hides the threats that will make a person fail to spot the hidden danger. That is why the shadow things are difficult to see unless you're looking for them. When you take her advice and assume the opposite is true, that makes her warning more complete. When she says there is fear, when she says that fear in the wrong circumstances can put a person in danger, when she says fear in the right circumstances can save a person from it. By using fear to power the use of honesty and the truth, that will make a person blind to all of the truth. They will think they're going in the right direction, but when fear is in the driver's seat, eventually the shadows will catch up, because fear causes blindness. And it only takes being touched and held by one of these ideas to make a person's trip through the narrows a failure. Richard narrates that in the dark it's difficult to see the trail, and it isn't a straight path. It's not like the normal hike through the woods. The trail twists. It goes over rocks and roots. It almost feels circular at times, going around trees and along the side of a hill. The soft scraping sound is steadily getting closer and closer, and Richard finally realizes what that scraping noise is. It's claws on rocks. In the night, Richard sees two shadows pressed against the sides of the trail. They have to pass through them. Kaylin is just terrified to be as close to them as she has to be while they pass. Kaylin is unable to proceed any further without Richard there to put his arms around her and let her block them from her sight. He realizes she is terrified of them and can't function around them. He admits that he's terrified too. He says every step feels like a violation. Every inch feels like an inch too far. But when he looks back down the trail he's been on, he can't see if the shadow things are following behind him. All of a sudden, in front of them is a dark black shape which Richard recognizes as the giant rock with a split down the middle. They had made it to the narrows. Once they enter the rock, Richard knows it is time to use the nightstone. The trail is invisible. There is no light. Richard and Kaylin are in a place of total blackness with no direction to be given by their senses. Having decided there is no other option, Richard takes the leather pouch with the nightstone inside it and dumps the stone into his hand. Once he does, there is a warm yellowish light which floods the surrounding area, making them both gasp at what they see next. The closer a person gets to confronting the core of an idea which gives them intense pain or intense anger, the more difficult it is to see the way past that point. The reasons why it is a waste of time gets stronger. The calls to disengage from the exercise altogether get louder. The fear about what it would mean to have been wrong about something for so long gets darker and more terrifying. But when a person has the strength to make it this far, they will reach the part of the path they can't see from their own perspective. They are at the limits of their own mind. And beyond that point, there is nothing they know. The only way to learn about what is beyond is to search out unknown ideas and positions and ask what they would mean if those were true. That is the moment that truth and honesty are needed. They're used from a position of honest admission of blindness and not a position of fear. Once a person reaches this moment of honest blindness, that is when it comes possible to see everything, because the blindness doesn't come from not being able to see. The blindness comes from only being able to look at one spot. Fun fact: leather is commonly used as a symbol for power, strength, flexibility, and protection. That sounds pretty similar to a certain blonde-haired lovely lady we'll be meeting later in the Sword of Truth series. The leather pouch represents the power, flexibility, strength, and protection behind a person's ability to choose. They can decide to open the pouch or not open the pouch for whatever reason they deem fit. It can be from fear or from honest blindness. They decide, and that sounds a bit harsh to someone who has a habit of always choosing to act the same way in every situation. But there is hope. A person can be so focused on a single spot for so long that they are functionally blind to everything else around them for 1,000 times in a row. But it only takes one choice in the opposite direction to change everything they needed changing forever. The way is the way, but it only needs to work one time. The author even goes so far as to sell the same story 2 different ways by using the yellow color of the stone to point out the difference between using the nightstone in fear and using it in honesty. When assuming the color yellow has its positive meanings, the color yellow commonly represents personal power, courage, and self-confidence. It stands for wisdom, logic, memory, concentration, willpower, and communication. The color yellow in its positive meaning represents clarity. By using the advice listed above about assuming the color yellow has negative meanings, then it represents the cowardice, betrayal, egoism, and madness. Using fear to power the truth and honesty leads to the symptoms listed above. It twists courage to face the unknown into an instinct to be afraid of it. An intense focus on how feelings coming from a certain topic or idea removes wisdom, logic, memory, and concentration. And madness is what claims the attempt in the end, but beyond that point there is no more willpower, or actual will for that matter. There is only a blindness and predictable response, but communication, which leads to growth, and a removal of whatever is causing a person pain or anger will not be found there. Having been given clarity by the Nightstone, Richard and Kaylin can finally see what's going on around them. The yellow light reveals a solid wall of shadow things forming a half circle less than 20 feet in front of them. On the ground are dozens and dozens of grippers calling around. The light of the Nightstone seems to let the shadows know where they are, and they begin moving towards them. They're headed right for us. Richard grabs Kaylin's shirt and pulls her into the split of the rock. The walls of the rock are tight, and they give Richard anxiety as he feels the dark, wet, slimy walls closing in around him, making all of the women and all of the men happy for different reasons as both of their shirts become completely soaked through. They go through a tight spot where they needed to learn how to make it through a small crack in the rock, which is enough to stop the shadow things from following them, but not the grippers. Richard kicks one of them that gets too close, causing it to fly a good distance and land on its back. It stands up with its body to reveal all of its claws, hisses at Richard, and then begins to slowly crawl back towards them. Having made it through the crack, Richard pulls out the nightstone to find the trail again, but a mass of rocks and trees and other things moved by a recent mudslide has completely destroyed the trail. Richard steps back to get a better look, and the green wall of the boundary appears, and the author leaves us hanging at the end of chapter 18 by having both of them notice that the shadows are once again coming right for them. The symbolism here shows Richard's added clarity and realization of exactly how dangerous of a spot they're in right now, and he's right. That moment of clarity is a shock for people, and that is why it needs to happen from a place of honest blindness. When a person is trying to use the truth and honesty with fear as their motivation, that moment of shock won't kill a person, but it will kill whatever chance they had at learning what's hiding outside their field of view because they're so thoroughly focused on what they're afraid of. Richard realizes the only solution when you have been traveling halfway through hell is to keep moving forward. The grippers are always there, always angry, very persistent, always trying to latch on. Easy to overlook, deadly if ignored, and that is why honesty is their natural enemy. With the trail washed out and the walls of the boundary nearby, Richard and Kaylin now must find their way on their own without the aid of a trail to follow. Only the walls of the boundary are left to guide them, with the shadow things close on their heels. It's time for the official number 1 quote from Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth in Wizard's First Rule, Chapter 19. Please note that the views and opinions of what the official number 1 quote from this chapter is may differ from the views and opinions expressed by you about what your number 1 favorite quote for this chapter is. In the event that your number 1 favorite quote is different from the one mentioned here, please list your candidate for number 1 quote in the comments below. And the official number 1 quote is when Richard describes the contents of the Book of Counted Shadows, saying, "Most of the book, though, was taken up with directions for countering unforeseen eventualities, resolving problems that could prevent the holder of the boxes from succeeding." In our next episode, we get the first appearance of Dark and Rawl, and we learn that while he doesn't know everything, the things he does know are more than enough to give Richard and Kaylin their share of trouble. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you feel like you found honesty, strength, and connection in this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you found something that helped you, I ask you to share a link to this video with those you wish to have what you have found. If those feelings are not there yet, I ask you to come back in the next episode and give me a chance to try and change your mind. Thank you for watching. My name is Tom. I've been your guide. This has been Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth. Come and join me next time so that while I am seeking these truths, you can become seekers of truth as well. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.